Hello everybody, and welcome back to another edition of the JTISREBORN movie reviews. I know, it's been quite a long time since I talked about the DC animated movie universe. But with the upcoming release of Constantine the House of Mystery, set to continue after the events of Justice League Dark Apokolips War, I figured now was a good time to get back into it. So, with today's video, be sure to sit back, get nice and comfy cozy, as we're going to be continuing our journey through the DCAMU as we take a look at the fourth entry in this universe with the review of Batman vs. Robin. Released in 2015 and directed by Jay Oliva, Batman vs. Robin is a sequel to the movie Son of Batman with a plot based very loosely on the Batman Court of Owls storyline by Scott Snyder. I think that if you're somebody who hasn't read that storyline, then you'll probably enjoy this movie as is. However, I can see some fans being just a little bit disappointed in this movie because it isn't exactly a faithful page-for-page adaptation of that particular storyline. It more so just takes the concept of Court of Owls and does kind of its own thing with it. So the plot this time around takes place after the events of Son of Batman. We see that Bruce and Damian are still trying to learn to adjust to being a part of each other's lives, and their conflicting ideals on crime and what we consider justice are fully on display here. Given Damian's upbringing, it would have felt cheap to have him and Bruce totally in sync with each other after the events of Son of Batman, as we didn't fully explore that relationship just yet. It was more so the beginning of that. If you were raised one way your whole life, it wouldn't be easy to break free of those habits and behavioral patterns, but that is part of Damian's biggest struggles in this movie. Even by the end of the movie, he realizes that with all these different voices going on in his head and pulling him in all sorts of different directions, he has to learn that in order to grow, he has to go out on his own and figure out who he truly wants to be himself. The main aspect of this movie that works for me is the father and son relationship between Bruce and Damian. It's a fascinating relationship, given that Bruce and Damian are both so similar and yet so different at the same time. The movie doesn't quite have the amount of time that, say, a TV show or a comic has to kind of fully dive into that relationship, but I think that given the time that they had, they did do a good enough job with it, and I think it's worth a watch. We get to see Bruce's struggles as a father, as well as Damian's struggles as a son, as he tries to reform from his assassin upbringing. As the movie begins, we see that Damian had stolen the Batmobile to try and rescue a bunch of missing children, some of whom we find out were later brainwashed and changed by Anton Schott, aka the Dollmaker, voiced by Weird Al Yankovic of all people. A bizarre casting choice, but surprisingly works really well. I actually had no idea it was Weird Al until I actually looked at the credits for this movie. Anyways, after Damian gets the upper hand on the Dollmaker, the temptation to kill the bastard after what he did to those poor kids is showcased, but Damian made a promise to his father that he wouldn't. But as soon as he turns his back, a character known as Talon rips the Dollmaker's heart clean out of his chest and kills him instantly. Talon is one of the main villains in this movie, along with the Court of Owls, who, in case you don't know, the Court of Owls is actually a secret society of wealthy Gothamites who run/influence the city from the shadows. Talon himself is actually a pretty interesting character in this movie. Having come from an abusive background, he was recruited and trained by the Court of Owls and soon takes Damian under his wing as his partner, having seen Damian's potential. He also acts as a bit of a temptation for Damian to give into his assassin upbringing, which he has been trying to overcome. Talon's form of justice is far more lethal than Batman's, killing when he feels it's absolutely necessary. He is a master manipulator too, taking advantage of the growing conflict that Damian has with his father. Throughout this movie, you have Bruce, who's been trying to get Damian to overcome his assassin tendencies, but you also have the issue of the two of them not fully trusting in one another. For instance, when Batman finds Damian with Dollmaker's dead body, he immediately jumps to the conclusion that Damian was the one who killed him. However, we know this isn't the case, and if Batman actually took the time to look, he would see that it was pretty obvious Damian didn't kill him. Soon, Bruce does realize that Damian really didn't do it, and when he tries to ask him again what happened, Damian basically tells him to fuck off and figure it out himself, obviously feeling insulted that his dad would even think he killed someone. After that scene, we see Bruce trying to score with some hot blonde chick named Samantha, who later turns out to be the Grand Master of the Court of Owls in disguise, and she's also Talon's, fuck buddy, too. You know, now that I think about it, Talon does pretty much everything possible to piss Batman off in this movie. First off, he's fucking around with Bruce's would-be girlfriend, that two-timing slut Samantha. Second, he tries to manipulate and steal Bruce's son from him and make him his new partner. Third, he leads an attack on Wayne Manor, wrecking his home in the process. Fourth is that he tries to take over all of Gotham while taking Bruce's entire fortune. Oh, and he also kicks the crap out of Nightwing, too. Something I'm kind of noticing happens a lot in this universe. You know what? Before we move on any further, let's talk about Nightwing in this movie. Nightwing comes to the picture after Damian got into trouble for trying to sneak out at night, so Bruce called him in to babysit him. Now, in the comics, Dick and Damian are actually my favorite dynamic duo, and in this movie, we get a little taste of that, which is great. But aside from that, all that really happens in this movie, and in most of this universe, is that Nightwing spends most of his time getting his ass beat. Now, Shawn Mayer still does a pretty great job voicing him, and his personality is on point, but he's always getting the shit beaten out of him in each and every one of these films. He can never have, like, one good solo victory in any of these movies. He's one of the most iconic characters in all of DC Comics. Show the man some damn respect! Anyways, getting back to the main story, after Bruce and Damian continue to have issues with each other, Damian starts to work with Talon, who's getting frustrated with Damian for not fully committing to his methods after working a few nights together. With Batman's voice and methods lingering over him, we see that Damian is given an ultimatum by Talon. Either he fully commits to following his methods, or Batman's. It is then at this point when Batman finally shows up to confront Damian and Talon after having had several run-ins with the Court of Owls. Bruce then tries to put a stop to Talon, only for Damian to get in the way. It is at this point where we get the big fight scene that the title of the movie promised, Batman vs. Robin, and with this being directed by Jay Oliva, the action sequences are really good, and they definitely don't disappoint. I know some people complain about how Damian technically wins the fight, but it is pretty apparent that Bruce is holding back and doesn't want to actually hurt his son. When the two fight again in Apocalypse War, the Batman who isn't holding back, Bruce pretty easily takes him down. After the fight, it seems like the two of them are finally able to let out their grievances with one another. However, Damian makes the decision to leave Bruce and join up with Talon, having had enough of his father at this point. Now, Damian may be an intelligent character, but he's still just a kid, and while kids may feel like they know everything, they really don't, and given the fact that he's been molded and manipulated to be used by others pretty much his entire life, it's easy to see how he can get duped by somebody like Talon. After Damian goes off with Talon, he ends up in the presence of the Court of Owls, who find out that Damian is actually Bruce Wayne's ward. Keep in mind, I say ward and not son, because they don't actually know that Damian is Bruce's biological son. In fact, when Bruce, Damian, and Samantha had their little conversation earlier on in the film, before Damian could admit that he's Bruce's son, Bruce cuts him off and says, "Damian's my ward," not actually acknowledging him as a son, which, I gotta think about it now, it kind of probably has a bit of a psychological effect on Damian, probably thinking that he's not good enough to be his father's son. Just something I kind of picked up on. I also find it funny that the Grand Master can't recognize that Robin is Damian until he takes off that mask which barely covers part of his face. Once it's revealed that Damian is Robin, the court decides to kill him as a means to get back at Batman, and the court orders Talon to do the job. But Talon, seeing himself in Damian, decides against it and murders the whole court instead, including his fuck buddy, the Grandmaster Samantha. After taking her down, he grabs Damian and traps him in this container that fills up with the liquid that was used to preserve the other Talon creatures. One thing I never understood about this scene is that Talon puts him in this container to keep him safe, but then he proceeds to turn on the liquid and tries to drown the kid. Like, it doesn't make much sense to me. Yeah, I know that stuff was used to preserve the Talons, but those things are long dead. Like, this is somebody who's alive. Wouldn't this do some serious damage to him? Why not just leave him in the container without turning on the liquid and just go away? Anyways, in the final battle of the movie, Talon leads an army of other Talon creatures to Wayne Manor. The battle gets pretty brutal. Nightwing gets stabbed multiple times. We see Alfred being a total badass shooting these things with a shotgun. Batman fights off in a giant mech suit before Talon comes in to do battle, and we get probably my favorite Batman line in the movie, where he just had enough of this shit and he just snaps.
You and the court try to take control of my city and destroy my home. But worst of all, you messed with my kid. So this is gonna hurt, and I'm gonna enjoy it.
Batman and Talon have a battle, but ultimately a mostly exhausted Batman couldn't keep up and is beaten by Talon. But before he can kill him, Damian returns to save his father. Then the two of them have a big fight where Damian wins, but Talon ultimately gets the last laugh by grabbing Damian's arm and forces Damian to stab him in his throat with his own sai he had in his hand, which ends up killing him in the process. It also has a bit of a traumatic effect on Damian, who throughout the movie has been going through his own internal conflict with the whole justice not vengeance sort of thing. Talon literally forces Damian's own hand to kill him. Yes, Damian wasn't in full control of it all, but his hand was on the blade when it killed him, so he does feel somewhat responsible for the whole thing. I do kind of wish that the other DCAMU films would have explored that trauma that he had with Talon just a little bit more, but I think you can make the argument that he worked out that trauma between this film and the next one. So after Talon dies, Bruce tries to comfort Damian and tell him that he is proud of him and welcomes him to stay home, but Damian can't fully accept that yet, as he doesn't know who he is. Everyone has been pulling him in different directions his whole life, and he needs to figure out who he is, which actually is a pretty good ending for his character in this movie. He needs time to sort things out on his own, and even Bruce is supportive of that, even suggesting that he go to a monastery in the Himalayas that he went to when he was younger and needed guidance. Which Damian ultimately ends up doing at the end of the film, but not before he and Bruce share a hug together for the first time in most definitely my favorite scene in the movie. What can I say? I'm a sucker for these kinds of moments. Even a jaded, cynical bastard such as myself can still get emotional when stuff like this happens in movies and TV shows. And comics too. There's just something about having two characters that have had a bit of a rocky relationship, learning to reconcile and ultimately ending up hugging each other in the end. Moments like these usually end up becoming my favorite part of the movie or the TV shows that I'm watching when shit like this happens. Hell, I'm somebody who still gets choked up at the ending of Son of Godzilla when those two characters hug. The same thing applies in this scene here. It's just heartwarming stuff. And I like heartwarming stuff. So that was Batman vs. Robin, a movie which I think is one of the stronger entries in the DC animated movie universe. I actually like it a lot more than I do Son of Batman. There's a lot that this movie has going for it, although there are some faults with it too, at least in my opinion. Let's start out with the good before we get into the weaker aspects of it. The action sequences are all well choreographed and do a good job showcasing the different fighting styles of the characters while keeping you engaged in what's happening. The movie can also be pretty funny at times. There's one funny scene with Dick when he's on the phone with Starfire, but I think that the funniest scene in the movie is when Damian basically ruins the moment for his dad when he's trying to hook up with Samantha and completely throws him off his game. I laughed quite a bit at that, although I do feel as though they missed an opportunity for Bruce to get some sort of payback on him, given that later on in this universe, we know that Damian forms a relationship with Raven. I feel like he could have had maybe one moment of Bruce messing with Damian and embarrassing him at some point when he was talking to Raven. Maybe like throw off his game. Perhaps the two of them are flirting, and then Bruce interrupts at some point and just kind of like kills the mood for him. I think he could have had that, and then maybe like afterwards, Damian just kind of gives him this look like, fuck you, Dad. And then Bruce is just like, payback's a bitch. I don't know, just something like that. I would have appreciated that. I think that could have been actually really funny, and would have made for a nice, memorable father and son type moment between Bruce and Damian. My favorite aspect of this movie is when you get to see the two of them bond together as father and son. There's a nice moment when the two of them go watch a movie together because it's one of the few moments in the film where they're both out of costume and are given some time to unwind a bit. Look at that smile on Damian's face there. It's totally 100% genuine. It makes the characters seem way more relatable. I think the movie needed more down-to-earth moments like this with the two of them outside the costume so that when the conflict does occur, we are more emotionally invested in what's going on with it. In terms of other things I like about the movie, it was nice to see Kevin Conroy do a little cameo in this thing as Thomas Wayne. I always appreciate whenever the definitive voice of Batman shows up in something, and I also like the dream sequence portion of the film. In terms of cons, some aspects of the film can be rather rushed and underdeveloped. I do wish the movie was a little bit longer to flesh some things out some more. For instance, the character of Samantha is just kind of there as an antagonist. We don't really get time to dive into her backstory and find out what drives her motivations. Also, as much as I am a big fan of Damian, he is after all my favorite Bat Family character, I do think that he is a bit OP in this movie. The fact that both Nightwing and Batman couldn't beat Talon, but he could, seems a little bit out there to me. Granted, you could argue that both Bruce and Dick were hurt and Talon was exhausted too, but I still wish there was some sort of way that maybe the three of them could have worked together to take Talon down. I also think that the conclusion to Bruce and Damian working out their issues and fully accepting each other as father and son could have been just a little bit stronger. With Bruce, we had the hallucination sequence where he works out his internal struggles and comes to see the horrors of what could happen if he doesn't step up to be a proper parent to his kid. That part is visually shown to us in a creative way, even managing to find a way to incorporate Batman 666 Damian into the mix, and it ultimately culminates in Bruce truly accepting Damian as a son and striving to be better as a father. But with Damian, he gets trapped by Talon and escapes, and then just starts calling Bruce his father, even though the last time they talked, Damian had agreed to run off with Talon. Yes, Talon betrayed him, but that still didn't solve all the issues Damian was having with Bruce, including the mistrust and various bits of tension the two had. I just wish there was a bit of a stronger resolution for that, and for Damian at least. I think it still works for the most part, but it could have been a little bit stronger. Other than that, though, I don't have any other real issues with the film. I think it works pretty well for the most part. Anyways, that's going to wrap it up for a review of Batman vs. Robin. I liked the movie when I first saw it back then, and I still like the movie now. In terms of the first four movies within this universe, I like it more than Justice League War, Son of Batman, and definitely Justice League Throne of Atlantis. It could have been better, there's definitely some room for improvement, but I think for the most part they did a pretty solid job overall with it. And I definitely recommend you check it out if you get the chance. And if you have seen it, let me know what you thought of it in the comments section down below. But that's not going to be where our journey ends. Oh, no. Be sure to come back next time as we continue our journey through the DC animated movie universe as we take a look at the 5th entry with a review on Batman Bad bad blood. Ooh, this should be a fun one to talk about. So, with all that said, thank you all so much for watching this video. Be sure to comment, like, and subscribe. And as always, take care now. Bye-bye then, and I will see you all in the next video. Peace.